Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ian Harkins, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. I myself have been working with Appleruth as a tutor, as an AP tutor for the histories, the government, and some of the languages for over 10 years now. And I, despite the accent, took the APs as well as a high school student. And I'm delighted to tonight be in the presence of greatness. We've got with us Martin Kirby, who can speak with authority on the physics exams. Martin has got more than 40 years of teaching under his belt, including 33 at Hart High School. Mr. Kirby is undoubtedly one of the most experienced AP physics teachers in the country and was the Siemens AP Teacher of the Year in 2001. He served for several years as an AP physics exam grader, has been a consultant to the College Board for the past 25 years, and has served on its exam development committee. He's even teaching AP teachers how to be AP teachers in his summers. Thank you very, very much for joining us tonight, Mr. Kirby. And then Mr. Tyler Lee has taught the AP US history now for the past 6 years, during which time his students have passed the test at rates ranging from 85 to 96%, which is nearly twice the national average. Mr. Lee has also served as an exam reader, grading thousands of student long essay questions, LEQs, and document-based questions, DBQs. So Mr. Lee, thank you as well for joining us. So folks joining us, we're going to let people filter in as we can. But in the meantime, we're going to be sending out a poll that we would love folks to take over the next 5 minutes or so. We would love to get a sense of who you are, what has brought you to us tonight, how we in our questioning can best serve you. I'm going to be polling a lot of questions from the audience that I hope will be a very vigorous chat that I can then put to Mr. Kirby and Mr. Lee. So I hope to be, based on who is joining us, I hope to be tailoring the questions to what it is you've come for. But I've certainly got some questions that I can start us off. So we want to know, like, who are you here with? Are you an educator? Are you a student by yourself? Are you there with your parents? What level of high school are you in? Is this your first AP that you've taken? What feels like it's the most helpful way to go about studying? So anything that you can send us, like, and if you want to chat us as well, I'll be reading it over the course of the next hour. So thank you very, very much. And with that, and folks, please, like, even as we're talking, like, feel free to fill out the welcome poll. But with that, I'm going to start with our esteemed panelists, if I may. So Mr. Kirby, Mr. Lee, this question I think is a timely one. And whoever wants to answer it, please chime in first. But we've got now about 1 month to the first APs. What kind of practice per day or per week do you recommend for your students, and do you think yields some of the best results?
Well, AP review should really start as, like, it should be sort of continual throughout the year, which is, you know, a bit late for some people, but for people taking APs next year, it might be useful, which is just to go over the stuff that they've learned 2 weeks previously. Studies have shown that that actually really helps retain the material. Right now, we're about a month before the exams. If one, like myself, when I was younger, I think, okay, I'm going to review for like 10 hours an evening every night. There's no way I can do that, and I'd hate myself. So I think something reasonable, which would be maybe 2 20-minute sessions, maybe 2 days and then 1 day off, something you can actually do. And I believe, at least in the sciences, the best review is actually to try and lay your hands on as many real AP questions as possible and the answers that come with it. So you get used to the kind of questions that come up the most. For instance, in physics, simple harmonic motion is only 4% of the test. So you get a view of the kind of questions that arrive. And just one last thing. For 9 years, I wrote the AP physics questions, and you'd think that there's an infinite number of questions you can ask. There aren't. You wind up having a twist on that one you gave 5 years ago and another twist on the one you gave 3 years ago, because there's actually a limited set of questions you can ask. So if you review as many as you can, you haven't seen the questions you'll be asked, but you've seen questions that are quite similar to the ones you'll be asked.
And then same question for you then, Mr. Lee. Does that feel like it echoes your experience as well, that doing these sort of like, I love what you're saying, Mr. Kirby, these sort of short, intensive bursts, kind of like a workout, like do 2 20-minute sessions, 2 days on, 1 day off. Does that feel like it echoes for you as well, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. I think the struggle with history courses, and this is speaking to AP World, AP Euro, APUSH, even economics and Gov, so much is kind of forgotten from the beginning of the year if you aren't implementing that plan that Mr. Kirby was talking about, where you're trying to review as you go throughout the year. So much is from August, September, October, it's forgotten, right? The skills are being built throughout the year, but the content is forgotten. So I think when I say forgotten, it's back in your brain. You learned it once. You just need to bring it back to the front, right? So I think those 20-minute blocks or those short study sessions would be great in refreshing that content. So whether it's a review book, and I think we're probably going to get to this later, or watching fantastic YouTube videos that have been made by teachers, just like small content review that allow you to tap into something from months ago, it will allow you to really think about what your areas of weakness are, the areas that you need to spend more time on. So if you have a review book and you're skimming through it, you're not reading the whole thing because that's overwhelming, especially if you're taking multiple AP classes. But if you're skimming a review book and you're identifying the areas that you need to spend more time on, then you could dive in those 20-minute sessions, in that evening session where you're like, oh, I need to go back over this era or this piece for any subject. So I think you can't learn the whole thing in 1 month, right? You can't, some people might, but it's not a good idea to self-study 1 month before for the whole thing. You need to identify what areas you want to work on to maximize your result.
So this is actually bringing up a question that Sathya just posted in the chat that was a variation on something that I wanted to ask you both as well. So we're talking about, we're talking about the tweaks that we had on questions from 3 years ago, 5 years ago. What are some resources that you would point students towards, or that you would recommend students take? Do you say always look at past real tests that you can get from the College Board, or are there specific books that you find, or publishers that you find more accurately reflect the types of questions that you're asking, be it Barron's or the Princeton Review or anything like that? Or do you just want to stick with, stay with the genuine brand College Board questions where you can? And if so, where can you find them?
Well, to answer some questions in the Q&A, one of the questions is, which is relevant, where can you find the practice problems, which are the most useful things? So the best place to find them is on AP Central. You can find all the questions up to a couple of years ago, because COVID kind of messed things up a bit, but you can get like about 5 years worth of questions from that. If you Google AP questions, you can find ones that are even older. As far as books are concerned, in physics, the book that I'd recommend is Five Steps to a Five by a guy called Jacobs. And what's good about it is that it's thin. Some review books are like, 1,000 pages, and that's not a review book, that's a textbook. So what you're looking for is something that summarizes the basic ideas, something that doesn't explain everything all the time. One note about the review books is they vary in quality hugely. So you might have one publisher that's got 10 different titles for AP tests, and one might be excellent and another one could be appalling. So one can't recommend a publisher, it's particular books. So I can't talk to other AP subjects, but I think talking to your teacher would be a good idea to have them recommend a book. Yeah, Tyler.
I would add two things. First, you were talking about the AP, Googling AP questions. I think go to your teacher too, because teachers have access to AP Classroom. In AP Classroom, they have practice tests that they can assign. So kind of like advocating for yourself, a teacher might not realize how many questions or from past exams that they have access to. So they could create quizzes for a class and they could implement that. So I would say AP Classroom that your teacher has access to would be a good resource. Mm-hmm. And then for the history courses, again, for all of the history courses, I've found the most consistent to be the set of books by the publisher AMSCO, AMSCO. And for me, that's based on content. It's a good balance between being too heavy and too light. And my students that have used it for the past couple of years in whatever subject they're taking, they use that to kind of what I was saying before, to identify their weaknesses. It has those bold headlines, but it doesn't give one or two sentences about an event or about a topic. It gives a full paragraph. So if you're skimming and you look at the headline, and you're like, oh, I know this, I skip it. And you go to the next one, I don't know that. And then you dive into the paragraph. So it has enough content to strengthen those areas of weakness. So that's, I think, has been helpful for my students, whether it's World, Euro, APUSH, even economics. That's AMSCO would be, I think, is a good one. But the last thing I would say is also like pick one book, don't buy 5 books. I often see students who are like, I'm going to be successful because I'm buying all the books and then I'm going to read them all. You're not going to read them all, right? By picking 5 books, you're probably not even going to read one thoroughly. Find a resource that you can get your hands on, whether it's YouTube videos that an AP teacher is making or one of the books recommended, and then just commit to that, because you have to have that focused preparation rather than I'm just going to try and do everything.
One last point is, if there's like in physics, everyone has an Achilles heel or 10. There are ideas that you find incredibly difficult. And if they're not fundamental ideas, don't spend too much time studying them. In the economics of getting points on the test, there's a lot more sense in understanding better the stuff that you half understand already, rather than trying to get to grips with stuff that you never understood in the first place. And secondly, the AP review books have AP test lookalike questions, but they're not AP questions. And some of them are terrible. Some of them are reasonably good, but it takes 3 years to develop any AP test. And the things in the back of the review books were put together in a couple of weeks. So the difference in quality is vast.
Yeah. That's an incredibly important point. Yes. And I think, Mr. Lee, you've definitely pointed out that the more economical option of picking one good book and sticking with it is a much more efficient way to go, a much more economical way to go. There's another question that's being posed in the chat that's actually near and dear to my heart when I work with my students. The question is about how to recommend staying focused during the week or right up to the lead up to the exams and through the long testing periods. I've gotten another question even today from a student of mine who is struggling with anxiety. This is going to be the biggest test the most important test for her that she's ever taken before. And I'm wondering now, how do you in your teaching best approach that, either through questions of anxiety, questions of focus? Is there anything that you'd like to speak to on that subject?
Well, I think it's mostly to do with the personality of the student. If you're someone who freaks out about tests, I would try and do something, just take your mind off it, like watch romantic comedies the night before. I would treat yourself to nice food. I wouldn't review madly the night before. That probably won't have much effect. A good sleep, and also realizing in the big scheme of things that the AP test is actually bait. What happens on the AP test isn't particularly important, and your grade isn't super important. It's bait for the students to work hard during the year. It's also bait for the teacher, because everyone gets to see their results. So the teacher works really hard. So what happens is you wind up with your brain being more exercised than it would have been if you weren't in an AP class. So it's rather, the focus is more on what happened during the year rather than the AP test itself. Your AP score doesn't summarize who you are.
And Mr. Lee, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
No, I mean, I just wanted to leave that there. The AP score doesn't define you, and that's something that has to be said every year, and it's, you know, to remind the students. And I would say that one way that I think my students have helped to ease some of that stress, anxiety, and the buildup is to set up a plan. And I would say, you know, it's April 5th now, we're a month away. Sit down tonight, sit down tomorrow with your teacher, with your parents, or just yourself, and write out the dates, right, of all the dates that are coming up, not like the AP dates, but I mean like every day until the AP test, and write down the classes or the AP tests you're taking and visualize that. That's something that's helped me in creating my plan. That's how I plan my curriculum, and really set up a plan, like a checklist. On this day, I'm gonna, you know, review this era of my AP history class. And then the next day I'm going to review for my AP science class. And you create that plan, and you're just checking the boxes. You're, you know, chipping away at this massive marble sculpture, right? Sculpture that you're trying to design. And then by the time you get to the AP test, you're fully prepared. You look back and you're like, I just spent a month preparing for it. And then you can enter it confident and more relaxed, knowing that you don't need to cram the night before, because you just spent the whole month preparing for this, or preparing for multiple tests. So I would say the sooner that, if you haven't created a plan, the sooner you do that, the more confident you'll be in the lead up to it.
Do you feel, pursuant to that, that there's anything that first-time AP test takers that come out of the test and turn to you and say, God, I wish I had known to expect such and such ahead of time, or, oh God, if I had to do it again, I wish I had thought of that?
I think for my students, I spend so much time on the skills for the history classes, that for them, it's sometimes the content that, oh, they forgot this one thing or they forgot that thing, and that's what they stress out about. But I would say, in speaking to a whole group of students that are not my students, if you don't necessarily feel confident on the skills of the AP history classes, so the DDQ, the LEQ, the SAQs, those writing aspects of which are for all those history classes, if you don't feel confident on those, that's where you should spend some time practicing, because that's where the points come from the AP test. Yes, you have the content, but you need to put it, you know, to use with those skills. Those skills are where you get those points. So I encounter some students in tutoring that it's March and they haven't written a DDQ yet because their class just hasn't done that. If you haven't done that and you don't know the rubric, look up the rubric, right? Go on College Board's website, make sure you're comfortable and familiar with the rubric, because as a reader, when I'm reading the DDQs, when I'm reading the LEQs, it's a checklist. You know, I have an essay, I have the checklist of the rubric, and I'm grading it. So you want, as you're writing, as you're preparing, you want to make sure that you have that checklist in your head, you know the rubric, and you're implementing those skills.
Yeah, a perspective of a AP grader. We see lots and lots of students who've written absolutely wonderful answers to questions that no one ever asked, because they didn't read the question, which is completely understandable because you're freaking out. Some people are, like I do during tests. And so you read the question really quickly and you completely skip the last line, let's say. So you don't really know what the question is, and you do a fabulous answer, which gets no points. So read the question carefully. It's such a fundamental thing, but read it twice and look for important words. In physics, if you don't see the word constant, if the word exists, then you can't get the thing right. Secondly, in pretty much every exam, you need to cite either evidence or you need to cite principles. So if you're in physics, if you're going to write an answer, but it's just throwing equations out, that's probably not going to get much. You need to refer back to the law of conservation of momentum, law of conservation of energy, law of conservation of angular momentum, and sort of start from the beginning. And yeah, and I'm sure in Tyler's case, you must read a lot of opinions that aren't based in well, the wrong word's fact, but aren't based on content. They're just your opinion, and so they're great opinions, but they get no points. I don't know if I'm right, Tyler.
No, absolutely, and I think that comes back to the skills that I was saying. Is I think the students that aren't successful on the essays is they had some content knowledge. Sometimes they don't. They're just making things up, but they have it. They're just not applying it in the proper way. So I would say this is getting into the nitty gritty, but for AP World, AP Euro, and APUSH, on the DBQ, there's skills. If it's comparison is the skill, you're comparing and contrasting, right? If it's continuity and change, you're talking about continuity and change. If it's causation, you're talking about the causes or the effects. They'll share evidence, some of it which is true, but they do nothing with that evidence. They don't make an argument. And I think that's, at least when I'm reading the essays, that's the key that separates a successful essay from one that's not successful. And to what Mr. Kirby was saying, identifying those words in the question, in the essay questions for the history prompts, you have those keywords, whether it's causation or whether it's continuity and change. You identify those and then you make an argument. The essays that don't make an argument, that just put information on paper, whether it's true or not, are not going to be successful. So I think, kind of going back to the purpose of this and reviewing over the next month, it's not all content review you need, it's not all skill review you need. You need a balance of both, right? You need to review the content and apply it. So just cramming the information and remembering it is not going to make you successful on the AP test. You have to apply it. So practice questions, get your hands on as many questions as you can, like Mr. Kirby said.
Right. And just for those people out there taking the sciences, I don't know if it's true for other subjects, but you can actually get a very high score on the AP test on the free response questions and not get much right at all. I mean, not getting the right answers. The right answer is sometimes worth a point, sometimes it's worth none. What we do is we grade your work, and if you've got it half right, actually that's in physics, that's actually pretty good. You're doing well. And we're not looking for every single step. We're looking, so there are implicit steps. If you write this line and it's correct, we can assume that the previous thinking is there as well. So you'll implicitly get the points. So you don't have to be explicit all the time. And also in the sciences, we don't care about your spelling, capitalization, anything like that. It's just, did you write down the important stuff? You know, the stuff that's going to earn points. The quality of your handwriting, as long as we can read it, that's fine. Um, I would stay away from words like it. I know it sounds not like a big deal, but when the readers go out for a meal afterwards, like one of the biggest complaints we have is students who we think we know what they're talking about, but being extreme, they'll write something like, pick it up with it, then do it with it, and then add it up, and then that's it, or something. And so try and be specific.
There was a conversation that we were having beforehand that I feel like I want to let people in on how the graders for both the sciences and the history will sit down over the course of several days and grade these. Mr. Kirby, you were sort of referencing it back to it just now when you were talking about partial grading. And Mr. Lee, you were doing that as well when you talked about the rubric that you have for the histories. I do a lot of the histories as well, and I think that a great exercise for how to train yourself to write any of these long essay questions, the DBQs as well, is to write your essay and then sit there and grade yourself with their actual with their rubric that they have there. Did you get all 7 points here? So that's absolutely something else that students can be doing by themselves if they want to try to practice and grade their own. Do you both want to speak to how quickly or slowly, how many tests you can get through in a day when you're grading?
Well, so we're grading again in person in Kansas City this year, and in physics there'll be about 300 graders, which is a small number. By the third day, we're knocking out maybe grading one every 30 seconds. But if we find one that's difficult to grade, we don't sort of, well, it's difficult to grade. We can slow down and maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes, and maybe talk to another grader. What do you think of this? And so on. So we don't dismiss things. But typically it's about 30 seconds. And just going back to something that was said earlier, which I think is important. No one writes AP tests with the intention of anyone getting 100%. There's easy questions, there's medium questions, there's hard questions, and sometimes there's oh my God questions. So in the AP Physics C exam, occasionally there's no one gets 100%. Last year on the AP Physics 1 test, I think out of 100 and something thousand students, I think there were 3 students who got 100%, something like that. So don't expect to get everything right. It's the reason why there's such a range of questions, of difficulty of questions from very easy to very hard, is so that we can group people into grades 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If they were all of equal difficulty, then it would be very difficult to group people into grades. I didn't say that very well, but
we get it. And Mr. Lee, do you want to let us in behind the curtain, so to speak?
So I would say 30 seconds would be way too quick for grading a history essay. If we grade in 30 seconds, it's probably not going to be a good score. It's probably just a paragraph. But I would say a history essay is usually a couple minutes. And just going back to emphasizing the rubric is next to us. I'm at the beginning, by the end of it, for those of our teachers, we have it just in case we know the rubric, but by the end of it, it's burned into our brains. But every essay it's a fresh start, and we're looking at the rubric. So you can have a fantastic essay, but if it doesn't hit the skills that they're looking for you to hit, you might not get that score you want. So exactly what you were saying about practicing and grading yourself, I think is fantastic advice. If you that's that applying the concept, applying the skill, and then checking yourself, self-grading. I always come back from the AP reading and say to my other teachers that you have to go do this because this is the best professional development as a teacher. Grading so many essays makes me a better teacher and makes me better in supporting my students. So if you take on that role as, by self-grading, you're doing exactly what I do to strengthen my craft. So I do it in my class where they grade each other based on the rubric. So if you can develop that skill, that will help you write better on at least the history essays.
I think it's also good to characterize the people who are grading the test. One might imagine that the people grading the test are wizened old men who are desperate for cash, and like they couldn't get a job, gardening or cleaning houses, so it's their last resort. And they're bitter people grading tests, like swearing and gesticulating. Another stupid student.
You paint a vivid picture, yes.
Yeah. So in my experience, AP graders so half of them are college professors, half of them are high school teachers. They actually, probably without exception, love their job, and they're there more to help than they are to earn money. We don't earn much money, and we get a lot of it out of teachers. So they're really professional teachers, and they really care about the students. So we spend a lot of time talking about how to grade fairly, about how to deal with exceptions, and so on and so on. You actually have someone with a heart grading, and that doesn't mean that we're generous, but we are extremely fair.
Tacking topics for 1 second, there's a brilliant question in the chat that I'd love to address. What types of changes have been made to the APs over the past couple of years that you have seen?
So what's happened in the sciences is that we used to, until about 2014, we used to ask lots of clever questions with lots of lines of math, and it's all very complicated. And various government bodies and universities looked at these tests and said, the students who take these tests, when they go to college, they don't actually perform any better. So let's do something about it. So now what we do, at least in the sciences, and I think it's a similar kind of thing in other subjects, is that the test is really about, do you fully understand the basics? So like Newton's second law, if you're taking physics, is total force equals ma. It's a silly short formula, but understanding its implications and how it's used and so on is actually quite difficult. So in the present exam, it's like, do you understand the basics of forces? Do you understand the basics of momentum? So when a standard, ordinary, not particularly good college professor looks at an AP test, they go, oh, this is simple, anyone can do it. But if we give it to their students, they don't do very well because they don't have a fundamental understanding of the basics. I don't know if that's similar for you, Tyler.
I think in comparing, at least with APUSH, for instance, to the historic APUSH class, it used to be a lot of regurgitation of facts. Like, if you looked at it now, you'd be like, are they just trying to create a bunch of human Wikipedias? We don't need those anymore. We have the internet for that. And I think the history classes, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, so I'm sorry. But the history classes, it's all about the skills. You don't have to know all of the history. You don't have to know the whole chronology, because I think College Board is recognizing that information is out there, that we have it, on the internet, we have these things. So they want to test how you apply it. Can you take the experience of two different groups in history, and can you identify similarities and differences? Can you look at a century of history and identify what changed and what stayed the same? You have to know the basic facts, but it's more about the trends. It's more about that broader picture. It's about that. Those are the skills I'm talking about. It's not what date did this happen? What date did that happen? When I'm grading an essay, if a student gets a date wrong, that doesn't mean the whole essay is wrong, right? We forget these things. It's about, do you have that broad understanding to answer the question? And it just triggered something in my mind to something Mr. Kirby said probably like 20 minutes ago about being specific with the it thing. That reminds me too, is when students are writing essays, when they're not specific with information, if it feels like your essay is just like has this framework that could be used for any question, it's not going to be successful. It's having enough of the content, not all the content, having enough of the content to write a specific essay and answer the prompt, right? Whether it's that error or something else. So you don't stress out knowing every historical fact. That's the old AP exam. It's not like that anymore. Know enough, be able to apply what you know into making an argument or identifying these broad trends. That's, at least with histories, is what makes a student successful.
It's a great answer. Thank you. There's another question that is near and dear to my heart, both because I have students who ask me this question every year and because it throws me back into my high school experience. How would you say to plan for multiple AP tests if you're one of these poor souls who's taking more than one in the month of May? Is it a stressful? Is it so stressful that it's something you should still do? And if so, like, how would I go about juggling if I were in both Mr. Kirby's class and Mr. Lee's class? How do I go about this and keep my sanity?
Well, if you can do like 5 AP subjects successfully, do them. But I've had students who I don't know, taking maybe 4 APs or 3 APs, and maybe a month before the test, they say, I'm having such a hard time with AP physics. And I ask them, well, how are your other AP classes? Well, I'm doing a lot better in those than in physics. And I say, well, I have a discussion like, how about not taking the AP physics test and focusing on the other 2 tests so you'll do a lot better in those? I think getting 2 grade 4s in 2 subjects is a lot better than getting 3 grade 2s. So you've learned a lot in physics, that's great, but maybe not study for an exam if you feel you're up against the wall. If you're pretty confident you're going to get 4s and 5s, then keep on going. But I think it's good to know, be aware of one's limits and not try and force oneself to sort of like do the impossible.
Absolutely. I think College Board doesn't expect every kid to take 5 APs and take all 5 exams. They want you to be successful. So it's having that conversation, having that reflection. What can I do, and what can I do in a way that I'm not going to have anxiety for the next month and a half, right? Like, how can I apply my time, my effort in the most, in a way that maximizes itself and my performance? So exactly what Mr. Kirby said, if you feel like you're not going to be successful on one of them, maybe you have that conversation with your teacher, with your parents, whoever it is, with yourself. But if you think you can handle it, we're not here to hold you back either. It's having that conversation with yourself. I'm always up. I want my students to challenge themselves, to push themselves, but in a healthy way too. So I think that itself is also important, that, you manage your own health. If you've committed to 5 AP classes, if you're currently enrolled in 5 AP classes, that's an accomplishment and I applaud you. Doesn't mean you have to take all 5 exams.
Yeah. Do you necessarily advocate as well, once you get back the scores, do you have to submit all of the AP scores? What are your thoughts on strategically maybe not submitting scores?
I've taught thousands of students, and some of them now are really quite old, and I bump into them. Some colleges, it kind of depends upon the college, but some colleges like to look at a transcript, let's say with physics, and this student is really good at, I don't know, arts and history and so on. They got great grades. And physics, they're doing terribly, and they're taking AP physics and they're doing terribly in the first semester. And then they look at the second semester, oh my God, they stayed, they didn't drop the class. Oh, that's good. And then they took the test. They got a grade 2 or a grade 1, but they're not someone who just cherry picks. And the colleges aren't looking for the smartest of the smartest people. They're looking for people who study broadly. They're looking for people who are able to cope with difficulty, in other words, a difficult subject, and they're not going to drop things as soon as they seem difficult. So if it's ultra difficult, well, it makes sense to drop it. But if it's just tough, a good college will actually look at that as a plus. And I've had students come to me and ask me to write recommendations. Mr. Kirby, this was my most difficult subject. I did really well in my other ones. Could you attest to my work ethic? And I quite happily do that. And they've worked their backside off, and they haven't done very well. And I'm really proud of them. Sometimes they're my best students. The smartest student is not the best student.
I would add that a college is really looking for that commitment, right? The college, they're identifying amongst all these thousands of applicants who is going to come here to their college and see it through. Mm-hmm. So in exactly what Mr. Kirby was saying, they don't need you to get 5s on every subject in the humanities, in the sciences, in math. They don't need 5s across the board. You're human. You can have weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. Colleges know that. But that ability to see something through, and say you get that 2 on the test and you didn't pass, you have something you could write about in your personal statements that, you know, science, physics is not your thing. Physics is not my thing, but, you know, I had a supportive teacher named Mr. Kirby, and I wanted to challenge myself, and I saw it through. And you know what? I didn't get the score I wanted, but I'm proud of myself for seeing it through and finishing up. That on a college app, that looks fantastic to a college, because they're like, I want this person who's going to come here and finish strong and really support our school population, our community. And exactly about writing letters, the letters that I am most passionate about when I write rec letters is those students, the committed ones that saw something through, not the ones that, I mean, there's all the students that it comes easy to, but it's the ones that challenge themselves and push themselves. Those ones get that strong letter.
That is a brilliant, brilliant answer. I've got a couple of questions from Anonymous, but since we're on the subject of grading, can you elaborate for some people, after you're assigned a sort of number grade, can you explain how the curve is calculated? And then does it vary greatly from year to year? Like, how does one determine what is a 5 or a 4, for example?
So in physics, and as far as I know, most other subjects, that you grade all the tests and they get all the information together, and the ETS, Educational Testing Service, who are actually responsible for the exam, they actually have full-time professional educational statisticians, and they got lots of letters after their name, and they're all doctor, whatever it is. They really know what they're doing. And they have got various statistical models to compare the performance of the students that particular year with previous years. On the multiple choice test, there are questions that reappear every few years. So you can compare students across time. Occasionally, every few years, we give AP tests to college students, so they're the equivalent class at college, and see how they do. And so by the end of the day, it shouldn't matter which year you take the test, you'll get the same grade. So sometimes the AP physics test, and I'm sure all the tests, some years they look, and probably are, quite difficult. In other years, they look quite easy. Doesn't matter, you'll get the same grade. So I wouldn't complain about difficulty or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's graded very, very fairly.
I agree. Everything you said.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I feel like the APs have shown a consistency that not even the SAT or the ACT necessarily has, in my experience, in the same types of answers will receive the same types of grades sort of year on year. Mm-hmm. I'm getting some other questions that I would love to ask as well. Is there any piece of advice that you give to students for the test day itself? I asked this as well. I had a conversation with a former student just last week who talked about how she was really thrown when in an exam, one of the proctors brought blankets and slept through most of the thing. Not to turn the conversation to myself, but again, I took the SAT as well in the States. And I took it in a school that I did not recognize. I went into their science classroom. I sat on the corner seat, and it was only halfway through the second section that I realized that I was in their science classroom, and about 4 feet away from me to my left was someone's science project, which involved a live tarantula. I don't care how well you have prepared for any test. Sometimes the proctor just falls asleep. Sometimes there's a tarantula next to you. So, those are admittedly over the top examples, but is there any piece of kernel of wisdom that you can, I think I mixed my metaphors, pearls of wisdom, that you can impart to students for what to think about on the day? We've talked about rom-coms the night before, having a nice meal, getting a good night's sleep. How about on the day?
On the day, well, don't expect perfection. The kid next to you is going to be clicking their pen continually. If you're writing with pencil, the lead's going to break and you don't have a spare one. You just realized that your calculator is in radians instead of degrees, which, by the way, don't worry about it. It's fine. It might be too hot. It might be too cold. One of the things that can put you off is the attitude of the proctors. One would imagine, because it's so important, the proctor would be caring and loving and sit down, good luck, everyone, and so on. They're usually someone who's been told to be a proctor, and they're really busy people, and they're stuck in there for 3 hours. And so they're kind of like, sit down, everyone, and shut up, and so on and so on. And the other thing, if you've never taken an AP test before, one imagines that one's going to walk in and put your bag down and sit down, and within a minute you're taking the test. There's this blurb that the proctors have to read that goes on forever, and they have no alternative. They must read it, and there's various things you have to fill in and so on and so on. So when you arrive, you've probably got like 20 minutes, half an hour of getting like this nonsense out of the way before you actually take the test. One of the things my students often say when they finish the test is they never understood physics the entire year, but the moment they're asked to put their pencil down at the end of the test and they have no opportunity to write it, suddenly all the physics is clear. But maybe the day of, I would really recommend not drinking, for obvious reasons, like 9 pints of water, like 5 minutes before you walk in. I would, if you're going to eat, I would stay away from lots of white stuff and sugary stuff. I would eat stuff that's like slow energy release. Be aware of all the rules so you're not shocked by them. You can't listen to music. You can't bring in highlighters. If you bring in water, well, you're not supposed to have water. In my school, they allowed water as long as I was in a transparent thing with no labels. You can't wear a hat because there might be a cheat sheet somewhere in it. So there's all kinds of rules. If you're going to have a timing device, which is a really good idea because you might be in a seat where you can't see the clock. And so it's a timed exam. So it's good to know how much time you've got. Bring a watch with you or something, seriously, but make sure it doesn't beep or anything like that, because that's annoying for other students and it also might be confiscated. Do not, it's obvious, but don't communicate with any other student during the test because it might be misinterpreted as cheating.
And the appeals process is not exactly forthcoming in a situation like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and we also have all kinds of clever ways of detecting cheating, which of course we can't share. They're all
But, oh, sorry. So I think there's so many like variables out there and horror stories, right? That someone can encounter in their test setting. And really for me, I think there's focus on the things that you can control. And I'm kind of speaking to this as an AP history teacher, but also at my school, I coach academic decathlon team. So I just coach a group of people who study and take tests. So I have to constantly prepare my team for taking tests. So the things that I tell them, obviously to trust your preparation, but what you can control is don't do anything different that you normally do. So like don't eat a breakfast that you don't normally eat. Right? Don't drink something you don't normally eat. Like that's something you can control. Keep your normal routine because it won't throw you off. It won't throw your stomach off. It won't throw anything else off. And most important, this is what I tell my team and my students, is that once you're done with the section of the test, so in the AP history, there's 4 parts. Once you're done with the section, don't think about it. Put it behind you. Think about the next thing, right? Think about the thing you're on. So the multiple choice for the histories is the first thing you do. Once you do it, it's behind you. You don't think about it again because you don't want your mind to be stressed about that one question that you're just so stuck on. Oh, I should have gone that way. You can't go back to it. It's done, right? So don't think about it. Focus on the task at hand. And then at the break, kids, they're not supposed to be, but kids are going to be talking about the test. Step away. Don't be a part of that conversation. In your mind, get in, like, I know it's hard to do for a high schooler, but get into this like Zen mindset where you're just like, BBQ, LEQ. I need to make sure I write a thesis. I need to make sure I apply my skills, right? You're just doing that in your head. Prepare for the next thing. Don't think back. Think back once it's all over. Then you can do that if you want. But stay focused on the task at hand. You can control that.
Also,
that's brilliant advice.
There are students who are determined to get everything right. So on the multiple choice, they'll spend 15 minutes trying to get question number 1 right, and they get it right. And then they spend 15 minutes trying to get number 2 right, and then they get it right. But by the end of the test, they've answered 9 questions, they got them right, and that's not a good score. So time management is really, really important. The second thing is the way the multiple choice is graded. It's unfortunate. For most subjects, there's 4 choices. And if you get it right, you get 1 point. If you leave it blank, you get no points. If you get it wrong, you get no points. So what you must do is all the stuff you left blank at the end of the test, guess, because you're going to get 1 in 4 of your guesses right. You get 3 points. The only problem is being aware of when the end of the test is, which is why you must have a watch or a clock there. But the problem is you're not allowed to have a beeper, which means you're going to spend half your time looking at the clock. But if you can, try and, like, the last 2 or 3 minutes of the multiple choice test, guess every single blank, because your average student is, I mean, the average student rarely gets more than 50 or 60% of a multiple choice test right. So an extra few points really makes a big deal.
Yeah, that too true. We've had another question come in, another one that is near and dear to my heart, kind of going off of what to do on the day. Do you have any specific advice for students who have learning differences and extra time?
Tyler.
I would say make sure that your test, if you have been approved for extended time or whatever extra resources, make sure that your testing center, your proctor knows, right? Make sure that they're prepared. And if that means a day in advance or a couple of days in advance, speaking with the testing coordinator to make sure that it's solidified and they know, that's removing a variable that could cause stress. Like if you show up on the day of the test and you know that you're supposed to have this this difference on your test and they aren't prepared for it and they have to scramble, that could cause anxiety for you that you don't need on the day of the test. So I would say you shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be your responsibility, to make sure that they're doing their job properly, but it could relieve some stress for you on the day of.
The thing that should relieve stress is that someone with learning difficulties should be getting extra time, so you can be a bit more relaxed about it. In my school, the students who got extra time, actually, we put them in a lovely, comfortable room with a nice teak desk and a comfortable chair and like coffee and stuff. And actually, it was really lovely. So the extra time should alleviate the problems. And also, when we're grading, for those people learning difficulties, if you think your presentation or whatever is, you know, if it's not the best, we actually don't care. We grade what you do, and we don't grade the prettiness or anything like that. So as long as you get your ideas across well, and you're actually answering the question as it's written, there shouldn't be many problems.
I've had I've had essays that I don't know what it says, some of those words, and I just want the students to know, be confident that I don't say, I'm just going to skip it. No, that I go to multiple people and we figure out what those words say, because we want to know what you have to say. You took time writing that essay, so we're going to take time making sure that that gets read properly. So
Right.
Be fully confident that your essay will get read no matter what.
We are heading towards winding down, so I've saved the most fun question for the end. What is something that parents can be doing? How can they be helping? And maybe, if you like, how can they be hurting?
Well, parents could add to stress. You know, are you studying? Are you reviewing? You better study, you better review. I think a conversation with parents about what suits you most, and that's different for every student, is a good idea. Tyler.
I'm gonna go back to my my suggestion about creating a schedule, a plan. Like if you create that schedule for yourself, and then you share with your parents, they know that you're taking the time and you're organized, you're ready to go. So that should prevent them from constantly saying, "Are you doing enough? Are you doing enough?" And with that schedule, have that positive, supportive conversation with your students and saying, is there anything I can do to help you? Not necessarily like, are you doing enough? Are you going to get that 5? But what can I do? Do you need anything from me to help you on your plan, right? Put that ownership on the student. It'll make the student more prepared, I think, themselves if they're taking ownership of it, but just act as that support system rather than, the top down, leave that to the teacher in the classroom.
Right. And also maybe reverting to being a 5-year-old, like the simple reward system. Have a chat with them saying, if I don't review, I have to make you a cake or something. If I do review each night, then you make me a cake or give me money or buy me a new car or take me out for lunch or or something. But having your parents not only encourage you, but also have some nice, simple, silly thing as like, well, you didn't review tonight, so you don't get to watch, I don't know, like your favorite show or something. So, there's a carrot and a stick, nothing too painful, nothing too wonderful. But to have them on board to help you would be rather nice.
I would also add, just for parents to know that they're not in this right now. They're not taking the tests, and students might be taking multiple tests. It is stressful. It's a stressful experience. It feels like everything, even though it isn't, it feels like everything's coming down to this one test. Like all your hard work is coming down to this one thing. So I think for parents to just keep that in mind, like we've gone through a lot the past couple of years, and students in some states are finally back in the classroom fully. And it's been a tough time, and this is just another added stressful thing in stressful years for teenagers. So just keep that in mind. Know that the kids are they're working their hardest, and just try to be that positive support.
Mr. Kirby, Mr. Lee, those were some wonderful sound bites to leave us with. So to everybody who came tonight, thank you so much for doing so. If I didn't get to your question, I do apologize. There were a lot of questions asking specifically about what to do for such and such specific exam. What are the books that you'd recommend? How do I study for that? And this wasn't the forum for that. But if you are ever interested in getting the answers to that, please come to all of our AP final reviews. We are holding them throughout this month on pretty much every one of the APs. So if that's something that you're interested in getting some specific answers to specific tests and building off of anything that you heard today, that would be a fantastic resource for you. It just leaves me to say, Mr. Kirby, Mr. Lee, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. You've been incredibly helpful. And thank you for just being fantastically open and sharing as well.
And good luck to all the students. I wish you the greatest luck.
Good luck. I can't wait to read your essays. They're going to be solid.